it's certainly a pleasure for me to be here and be able to talk about one of the things that obviously is dear, but not only to my heart, but also to my interest, namely the Western Balkans. Today I will focus on the on the new tools and engagements that we have down there. I will give you a little expose here in the first session of where I see we stand and where we might be going. For the Q&As, we can go into the whole region. I think only Ljubljana I have not been in, but otherwise I've been in all the other countries in the region. So I follow that with great interest. Next week we are commemorating the 20th anniversary for the breakup of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina in April 1992. We shouldn't forget that over 100,000 people lost their lives. 2 million people were forced to leave their home. Most of them luckily has returned home, some has not. But it's very, very clear that the real war that was in Bosnia and Herzegovina scattered and ruined the trust and relationships that were there before. And that's a fact that we need to bear in mind when we are dealing with that country. Luckily, I would say, today, 2012, we have returned to some sort of normality. It's not quite the normality that was there before the war. It is a normality that, of course, is dictated by the peace agreement that was reached in '95. But it is more or less a country normal in the sense that it works the same way as its neighbors and so on and so forth. Of course, when we're looking at Bosnia, where it all started, so to say, 20 years ago, and we look at our engagement in the Western Balkans, it's clear that we didn't necessarily get it right in the beginning. We, as an EU, we went from not doing anything, then to doing something, then doing a little bit more, and then finally we started getting it right. But that was together with our partners, that was together with the United States. And we got an intervention starting in earnest in '95 that led to the period of peace we have had up until now. What it is very clear is that we have come a long way from the first days of our engagement there. But of course, in the days right after the war, some of the challenges we had when we look at what tools we are having available was that we were applying a set of tools, if best described as transition tools rather than post-war tools. It took a little time for us to adjust our tools. We took our stabilization and association process, and then we thought that would sort of take care of all the issues that came out of the war. It didn't quite do so. But over time, as Bosnia moved forward, it moved closer to the tools that we actually had. And if we are to sort of make a conclusion today in 2012, that is that Bosnia has moved forward to adjust its better to the tools we have, namely the integration tool. And that's probably one of the reasons why we are now starting to see some of the progress that we are seeing with the intervention that we are doing. I will say, however, that we will get back to the toolbox in a second. Whatever we are looking at, the number one reason why we have had any success after the peace agreement as an EU has been what happened in Thessaloniki and repeated later on, namely the expression of an unequivocal invitation to those countries in the region to join the Union whenever they would be ready to do so. That is the number one pull force that we have. That is the biggest tool in the toolbox. It is much bigger than whatever money we were to pump into any of these countries, whatever political engagement we have. The perspective of becoming a member of our club whenever they fulfill the conditions is the driving force. And a second thing that is very clear is, of course, that although we in the beginning realized that what we call the regional approach, when we didn't know better, we were dealing with the Western Balkans as a regional approach. That was sort of the catchphrase in '95, '96, and '97. Well, it didn't work at the time, but today it does. Because one of the things that's very clear is when the region moves, Bosnia moves. Therefore, with the positive developments that we have with Croatia joining next year, hopefully soon having Serbia, Montenegro, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia starting their negotiations, that has had a very big impact. It has a very big impact on a daily basis as what's going on down in Bosnia. So where we are today is actually in a situation that the political climate has finally started to improve a little bit. And we are slowly starting to get a process in Bosnia that looks very much like the process we had in Croatia, and we're trying to foster also in Serbia. With Bosnia, in March 2011, we sort of spelled out clearly our EU strategy for how to deal with the country. We reiterated what needed to be done for Bosnia and Herzegovina to have its Stabilization and Association Agreement enter into force. Unlike in 95 and 96, today it has a full effect, the Stabilization and Association Agreement. It means something. That is the track forward. We made a very short list, 3 issues that they had to do. And we spelled it out very clearly that they needed to enact 2 laws, or 1 law plus another one thereafter. And they needed to adjust their constitution so it would be in conformity with the European Convention on Human Rights. Doing that would lead to the entry into force of the Stabilization Association Agreement. In addition to outlining clearly what they needed to do, we also put our money where our mouth is, namely in terms of we beefed up our presence there from having had the EU presences scattered on a couple of missions. We pooled it all together in one office. We enhanced that office, so this office, besides having the technical capacity to do financial assistance to the country, also entails a large political and legal capacity that is necessary if you are to have any meaningful exchange with the political leaders in the country. In addition to this, we decided that we would close down the EU police mission. That was decided, but that a residual task force entity inside my office will be established, and therefore with a view to on the 1st of July 2012 we would have an office of 160 people there, which is the biggest EU mission in the world, with the clear task of assisting Bosnia and Herzegovina on its path towards the EU. That was what we did in September 2000. Or actually, this manifested itself in September 2011. And because of that, but not only because of that, but we saw that actually in September in Bosnia, the political leadership started to have a conversation with each other directly and not through the media, which is a good way of starting finding political compromise, namely they started to talk. Of course, we assisted the way we could, but I think it's very important at this point in time that the assistance that is done from our side is done quietly behind the scene. We are assisting good officers and so on and so forth, but the real work is actually homegrown, done by the political leaders in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This started in September, resulting in a political agreement in December last year, a political agreement that closed down 16 months of waiting for a government. They were almost beating Belgium in not having a government, but actually they just came in early there. They waited till all of us were out of the country on Christmas vacation, and then they made the agreement. So the agreement was done on 28th December. And we are now in March, and we have had almost 3 months of implementation of the agreement. But basically, what we are getting, what we got out of a long wait was that the political leadership in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they themselves found a way through the difficulties of deals, and they formed a government, a 6-party coalition government that in February appointed Mr. Bevander as their chairman of the Council of Ministers, And he, together with the president, Izetbegovic, who's just taken over the rotating presidency, made it clear that in his and their first travels, they went to Brussels to clearly underline that where they see Bosnia and Herzegovina go, namely towards the European Union. Mr. Bevander has been very clear in his statements. He has been saying that 2012 should be an EU year for Bosnia and Herzegovina. His intentions and aspirations are shared by the presidency, namely that they would work towards resolving the last issue that is outstanding vis-à-vis getting the Stabilization and Association Agreement entering into force before summer. The president was in Brussels last week, and he clearly said that they also had the intention to hand in a credible application by the end of June. But nevertheless, what is important to see here is that from having had a 60 months, perhaps even longer period before that, of no kind of political dialogue, people fortifying themselves in their positions, no movement on anything to do with the European agenda. We now, certainly on declarations, have a complete different mode and way of behaving, and we are actually moving things forward. A number of things, and let me just run through them, which have been, how to say, they had not moved at all in the previous 16 months or 2 or 3 years. They now, since the agreement and since the putting the new government into office, has started moving. Budgetary finance, one of the biggest problems is because of the constitutional order in Bosnia and Herzegovina with 14 jurisdictions. You have state, you have 2 entities, you have a Brčko district, and you have 10 cantons in the federation, all with legislative power. And therefore also all with budgetary requirements and so on. There is of course, like in any country, a big discussion about the budget, who should get what, how much, and where. But with that construct that I just outlined for you, you can imagine how difficult it is to get a budget discussion going. This is one of the things that they have agreed in principle on a budget. Now we need to see the implementation. But the agreement was a step forward. There was another long protracted issue of military and state property, which is also linked to some conditions that were put up some years ago in order to close the office of the High Representative or start to look into how to handle that. Well, especially the military property has been one of the outstanding issues for Bosnians moving on the membership action plan in NATO. And voila, on the 9th of March, there was an agreement on the military property and an agreement on how to proceed also later on with the state property. Something that when I was preparing to go there in September, people were telling me this will never be resolved. It's resolved now. Then, of course, there is the issue on the EU path, the compatibility with the European Convention on Human Rights, an issue linked to a case called Sejdić-Finci case. In short, it's about assuring that you can be elected to the House of People at the state level and to the presidency at the state presidency, irrespectively of which ethnicity or whatever group you proclaim yourself to be belonging to. The way we had to close the war in '95 was to make a very ethnically based constitution. That is seen before, but of course things that are good enough to close a war, to stop a war, is not necessarily the way that you build a country, and certainly not a country that should live up to the conditions that we are living up to here in Europe. So this is an outstanding issue, which of course is tricky. It's the last standing thing vis-à-vis the SAA. They are discussing it very much right now. There's a committee established. This committee actually discusses real things and not just meets for the sake of meeting, as was the case before. Whether I wouldn't even doubt, because I'm sure with the orientation days with the new government, I'm quite convinced that the coalition behind the current government, they will find a way through this, although it's very tricky. So the mere fact that this is being worked on is quite a movement forward. Another thing that has been outstanding in Bosnia for quite some time has been this issue that because of the constitutional construct, we all know that withstanding the pressures on negotiating with the EU will probably be a challenge for the country. I mean, we will have one address. I only want to sit with one person in front of me, sort of in described a little bit clumsy. Of course, this person can be assisted, but we have one address going in and one address going out. That is sort of the first element. Of the next and much more tricky element actually is how to allocate the various tasks there are in connection with transposing the acquis communautaire. That's a real tricky one, because you have in this structure that I described to you before different levels of governance with different levels of responsibility. Some of those responsibilities that in, for instance, my country is dealt with at the state level is in Bosnia and Herzegovina dealt with at the cantonal level. And there is a huge task ahead of the country to find a way to ensure that once we come and place the huge amount of documents in front of them, that they actually can find a way how to distribute the task amongst themselves. So this is an issue that has been brought up at a couple of occasions. We have sort of had two attempts from outside to help with the constitutional reform. First was the April package in 2006, and second time was Budmir, I think it was 2008. In both instances, this issue about a European clause in the preamble or some clause that would sort of give EU laws or necessary laws to be adopted to join the EU president, this was at the table both times there. I think the solution now for the politicians, because what we are going for now is a homegrown solution to this as well, is that a mechanism is found in which Bosnia and Herzegovina's various authorities, they find a way to coordinate their activities. But we certainly need this in order to make sure that we have a real partner on the other side once we get into the real game of negotiating. Another issue that has been outstanding for quite some time, and which is sort of a regional, if not Achilles heel, then at least a regional challenge, has been the judiciary. We saw that also with Croatia. That was where they had to work most at the last, in the end, and this is also very clear it will be a challenge for some of the other countries in the region. For that reason, I think it's the intention of the Commission to start the judicial chapter first and close it last in any future negotiation. For Bosnia, it's even further a challenge because of the again the constitutional order I just outlined for you before. You can imagine when you have 14 jurisdictions that can actually have that has legislative powers. For those of you who have done a little bit with law would know what that means for any lawyer that has to deal with it. What we have done in that context has been to sort of kickstart, or we cheated a little bit in that respect. We have started what we call a structured dialogue on judiciary. In effect, what we do in the structured dialogue on judiciary is we are starting the same mechanism that will start within the SAA process, which we will do for all sectors. But here we start with the judiciary. We know judiciary is the most challenging one. And it's the one that is probably on a daily basis, a lot of the discussions about what was actually the meaning with Dayton and so on, fights itself out in the judiciary. It's very clear. Power to govern, administer, express itself in the judiciary, and so on, vice versa. So therefore, what we have done is that we have had the Commission start up a structured dialogue on judiciary, and actually, to many surprise, including my own, this process goes very well. Every level of governance are engaging in a constructive manner. Everybody knows what this is about, namely at the end of the day come up with a structure whereby Bosnia and Herzegovina will have a judiciary that actually functions. But it surprised us. And I attribute it to the positive developments that started from September and onwards last year. This is the reason why we are where we are with the judiciary. So therefore, I'm quite comfortable to say, or to conclude that we have managed to at least get started the political or the EU agenda in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm not comfortable yet concluding that we are where we can be, and I certainly would say that we can do much more. But I'm turning back to my point and my main point in my introduction here today, namely that our biggest tool in the toolbox is the pull towards EU, the pull towards something new. A lot of my colleagues that have been in Bosnia, I left it in '97, that has been there since, and they have worked a lot with focusing on what did Dayton say, what was meant by Dayton, what was it that was put in place there, how was the division of labor, and so on and so forth. The agenda that we are doing with my office today is not different from that, but it's just a step forward towards something else. And that's a big difference between the two operations that we have down there. Now it's clear that let me just return to the vision that is in the current leadership. We saw they made a deal, they formed a government, they declared the movement forward, they want to go towards the EU. As I said, this clearly define what are our tools and what can we do. But as I started out by saying also is that this is a country that really had a war. Unlike some of the other countries in the region, this was a real war. There are scars, there is history, there's a number of things that are coming to playing in when you need to move it forward. And these things cannot be easily forgotten. We know that it's only 16 years since the war stopped, and there are still both political but also ordinary people remembering very vividly what happened. So therefore, there's of course parts of society that are still scarred by this, that could present problems in connection with this vision of moving things forward. I think, however, if we look at opinion polls, it's very clear that the population in the country are totally agreeing with us that moving Bosnia towards EU is the right way forward. Even if I am to take away the slightest doubters, if you only take those who are hardcore believes Bosnia must and will move forward towards the EU, we're well above 70%. I think any leader of our member states will be happy to have this sort of percentage at home, if that's where what was their conviction. And even if you just also take people with a slight doubt, we are well above, we're well up in the 80s. So that's a quite significant amount of support for the current government's way forward. It's very clear here, again back to the statement, when the region moves, Bosnia moves, that the recent positive development for Serbia has had a huge impact, or will have a huge impact in the way that this is being perceived. I'm quite convinced when I do my next polling around summer that we will see this impact, because the doubters that are in Bosnia and Herzegovina live in the part that is called Republika Srpska predominantly. There are doubters on all sides, but that's predominantly where the doubters are. And I think it's very important here that this notion of belonging together, we moving together, actually at this point in time, it does have a huge impact, and thereby strengthening our main tool. Just a short comment about our international presence. I explained to you how we have enhanced our EU presence there. Gone from scattered over 3 or even 4 different missions to having now the office of the EUSR, namely my office, together with the delegation of the European Union, together with what comes from the EU police mission when it closed, and we work very closely together with the other EU international presence there, namely EU4 Altea. In addition to us, we have a sizable OSCE mission there. And we have the Office of the High Representatives. Of course, a question to me when I arrived was always, what does it mean for the Office of the High Representative that you arrived in Sarajevo? And the way I explained it at that time was, and still does, was that my mandate, as I said, is looking forward. The Office of the High Representative is taking care of the obligations and concerns stemming out of the Dayton Peace Agreement. Of course, if I can use a sailing phrase, I mean, you always need to trim your sails. You have to look at them all the time and see, are you in the right position on the sea and everything. And that's the same thing with our international presence. I mean, nothing is static and nothing should be static, because the ultimate goal should be that we are feeding the development that we're seeing now, namely that the political leadership themselves, they take responsibility. A challenge here is, of course, that if you as an outsider look at the political landscape in Bosnia, you get confused because you think you're 95 sometimes when you look at the statements. A lot of statements are ethnically related. I am belonging to this group, therefore that, and so on and so forth. But I will say that with the sort of my experience from the region, that this happens many places. There is a debate going on. There are labels being used that was also used before the war, during the war, and after the war about which group do you belong to, and so on and so forth. But underneath, there is it's a political debate. And that's the positive things. I don't know if it describes it well, but I normally say you have sort of this layer of rhetoric from the old days. You have to penetrate, and then you get to the real political debate. And the process, you can never remove that layer of the debate. It has to disappear on its own, but it wears thinner and thinner. And while the political debate takes over more and more time. It's clear again, because Bosnia was through a real war, the layer of this sort of rhetoric is thicker than it is in the other countries in the region who didn't have the same experience. And I will say that, for instance, my experience from Belgrade and from Skopje underlines the same thing. The layer is getting thinner, and the political debate is getting more space in the. But I would say, don't get confused when you see the statements. It is a political debate happening underneath some of these things. As I mentioned, we will mark the 20th anniversary of the beginning of the war here in April, and but I hope that people will be able to mark that 20th anniversary in the right spirit, namely that happened at that time. We are now looking forward. I hope that and I actually believe that the views of the current government, namely to do something about the EU path in 2012, perhaps even doing the right thing so membership action plan on the NATO track could move as well, so we have both tracks moving in 2012. I hope that actually will happen. Their aspiration goes further than that. I, of course, in my official capacity cannot have a view on this, but I can tell you what they think themselves. That is, namely, that they will be able to hand in a credible application, not just an application, a credible one, in the course of 2012 as well, which would leave, hopefully, they hope that the Council would be able to ask the Commission to look at Bosnia's situation through 2013, and they hope, again, they hope, I underline this, that they will be able to celebrate 2014. Those of you who know history, you know the symbolism of that, and then really celebrate 2014 with a candidate status. Let's see whether their hopes and aspirations will be met. I'm certainly there to do what I can do with my team. I certainly believe that we have the tools, and we've already proven that we have the right tools to do what we need to do. So I hope that at the end of my mandate, I will firmly have left the baton, the what do you call it, with the political leaders there, and that they may achieve what they would like to do. In that respect, I am perhaps more optimistic than some of my colleagues, but as I say, my job is to help them look forward. I am, of course, equipped to handle the situation should we be forced to look backwards, and we will have either threat to the territorial integrity, security, or constitutional order. But the way that things are going right now, I would be surprised if I would need to use those powers that are vested in me in my mandate there. So with that, I think I will conclude my introduction and then open the floor